Yulon is coming from the Celestials' pantheon to assist the monks, disciples of the ways of the mist. That's pretty corny, but the spec is still similar to the BFA one. You get Touch of Death baseline, a change to Chi-Ji and Jade statue, and the spec is... okay, maybe a bit different, but only a bit. Still has some bugs, which will get fixed eventually, but hey, until then, let's check out the rest. First off, you gotta check our stream. All of this basically done live. The testing, the gameplay, and most of it done with you, the viewer. Twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline is the place. 5 days per week, different timetables to catch you eventually in one of those days. So see you there. Drop a follow, you know, stuff like that. Let's start with the baseline stuff right now. Expel Harm is now part of the baseline kit. Every monk has it, and for you as a Mistweaver, you get an extra function to it where you can cast it during Soothing Mist to also heal the target of your Soothing Mist. As for its effectiveness, it's kind of lackluster considering it's on the GCD and costs a fair bit of mana for what it does. Maybe if they take it off the GCD? Slight changes to abilities like Fortifying Brew, which was slightly nerfed to provide 15% of the bonuses as opposed to 20%, while Leg Sweep has had 1 extra yard added to the radius to its AoE effect, which to be fair was needed seeing as how spread out the packs are in dungeons these days. Touch of Death is back as well in its old Execute form. It usually had a specific function for each spec, but for Mistweaver right now it only seems to deal the damage. Either instantly kill the target if it has less HP than you, or deal 35% of your max HP to players and bosses if their health is under 15%. A good finisher can work well in dungeons on priority mobs to get them down that much faster, and obviously PvP. Summon Yulon, the Jade Serpent, is now a cooldown that's currently a bit bugged. It's supposed to come out and constantly cast Soothing Mists and Enveloping Breath, which it seemed to do as I was testing it outside groups, but in dungeons, sometimes it just flies around doing jack shit. Maybe that was a one-time bug, maybe I was unlucky. It will eventually get fixed, and to be honest, once it is, it's going to be a pretty cool cooldown to use. Going Kyrian, you will get Weapons of Order. Using this will reset the cooldown on Essence Font and increase your mastery by 10%. You will also do a Pulse of Healing when you start and at the end of each Essence Font channel. The mastery buff is misleading because mastery scales differently for different classes, so in fact you'll get around 42% buff to your mastery, or so say the big brains of Peak of Serenity, who did a lot of testing because my sorry ass isn't looking at character sheets when I'm misting about. The Maldraxxus one, pledging your allegiance to the Necrolords, will give you Bone Dust Brew. This is, as it sounds, a brew, an AoE effect that applies a buff to allies and a debuff to enemies that are hit within its AoE radius. Your spells have a chance to trigger a duplicate with a 35% in its effectiveness. Yes, this is both DPS spells and HPS ones. Since you are a healer, you would obviously want to hit your allies with it for some AoE healing, which plays into Mistweaver's strengths. If you already had Renewing Mist out on your party or raid, hitting them with this will just increase your throughput. Pretty cool. Moving to the Night Fae, you will get Feline Stomp. This is, well, you stomp the ground in a beautiful fairy fashion, leaving a big-ass mark, damaging enemies and healing allies by putting an Essence Font charge on them. If you stay in it and cast offensive and defensive abilities, you have a chance to reset its cooldown, which is baseline 30 seconds. The effect is a bit underwhelming. It could be the AoE DPS option since the healing is at the very most underwhelming. The Venthyr come with Fallen Order. This summons monk clones for 24 seconds from all 3 specs, each casting an iconic damage spell, while the Fallen Crane Adept, Mistweaver specs, cast Enveloping Mists and channel Soothing Mist. This is a pretty cool ability to use since it will end up summoning at least 6 Crane monks that will deal a fair bit of healing, while the other ones will be randomly summoned between Ox and Tiger to fist some fools and breathe fire. Talents haven't changed much. Mistweaver, at least at an average level, was pretty fun and strong in terms of its performance. The notable changes are first to summon Jade Serpent statue. The channel time of the Soothing Mist has been reduced from 30 seconds to 8 seconds, hasted, but the tick of the heal has been buffed a bit. This is actually a pretty big nerf since the appeal of the skill was always as a passive hot that was channeled while you saw to other things. Now you have to spend a lot of globals to make the most out of it, especially Soothing Mist globals, which you want to limit as much as possible anyway. The other change was to invoke Chi-Ji. Now it replaces Yulon and slams 2 of your allies with a gust of wind whenever you blackout kick, sun kick, and spinning crane kick, healing them for a bit. Every time it does that, you get a stack of 33% cast time reduction for your next enveloping mist, stacking 3 times. While the crane is up, you are also immune to movement impairing effects. This plays really well into the fist weaving build, actually empowering the playstyle, and definitely the funnest cooldown I played with for Mistweaver. Now we're getting into the good stuff, and the best stuff is ancient teachings of the monastery. At least for me, this makes your Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, and Rising Sun Kick heal an injured ally for 120% of the damage they dealt. It only applies if the ally is within 20 yards, so a bit restrictive in raids, but it does fuel the fist weaving build. Not to mention that in dungeons is really good, and to be honest, Rising Mist and this baby really feels well with the new Chi-Ji talent and actually solidifies it itself as an alternate way to play the spec that could actually give results. Yulon's Whisper is another option that activates when you pop Thunder Focus T to breathe out, in a cone, a breath of healing mists on your allies. It's actually quite a bit of healing for something you press kinda often. Again, the range of it comes into play, which can make it difficult to get full value out of in raids. Not impossible though. For a more single target healing approach, let's say tank healing, you can get Clouded Focus. This will essentially empower your healing for each enveloping mist or vivify you cast during a soothing mist by reducing their mana cost and increasing their throughput by 15% each, stacking 3 times. Whenever you need to pump heavy healing with this type of playstyle, you usually get the target up in a few globals, and more is hardly ever needed. The thing is, the buff expires after Soothing Mist finishes, and those 8 seconds can either turn into massive overheals if you want to spend every global on Vivify and Enveloping Mist, or the target might start taking damage once your channel is over. Don't get me wrong, the buff is good, mana cost reduction and increased throughput is not bad. Is it worth it though? Is it worth not moving at all to heal only one target? Is it worth not healing other people that take damage? Is your tank taking really that much damage where this is needed? I suppose you don't have to channel for 20 seconds to get ultimate value from it, and just the 2 to 3 globals of max stacks could be enough. Who's to tell? Now anyway, to address the AoE healing for once, Tear of Mourning makes Renewing Mist leave an extend life buff on the target that instantly heals them for a bit and increases the healing they receive by 15% for 12 seconds. More than that, when you heal with Vivify and Developing Mist, 50% of those heals go to the target with extend life on them as well. So the mechanic is similar to how Vivify cleaves on targets with Renewing Mist on them, which is already how Mistweaver does its best throughput in terms of AoE healing, at least burst AoE healing. Soulbinds are the expansion's version of the new progression system in the form of a secondary talent tree. Conduits being the empty talent slots that you socket with these conduits you unlock by playing the game, which can consist of a large part of your power as a player. From the Kyrians, Clea is a good example with one specific trait in Valiant Strikes. Mistweaver wouldn't be a stranger to crit stacking, and making those crits transform into eventual AoE healing with no mana cost can be something that really helps out in a group. Or go with Necrolords and choose the strongest crit trait in Hermir's arsenal, Marrowed Gemstone. This is where you actually get 20% crit chance for 20 seconds. Now that can be a big crit boost, merely as an example, but most likely there will be some simulations done to see which is the best. Because with Dreamweaver from the Night Fae, you first have Social Butterfly, which can either be a lackluster trait if only you have it, or amazing if a lot more people use it to increase the uptime on high levels of versatility. That and Pod Tender as a cheat death for you can be pretty good. Downside of the mechanic can easily be offset by either Life Cocoon or through Fortifying Brew and high octane mobility to get out of harm's way. Venthyr isn't very straightforward, but after a quick glance, Theotar can come with Soothing Shade for 12 seconds of mastery buff. Restricts movement a bit, sure, but you don't always have to be on the move. And Wasteland Propriety that can function as a small defensive buff for your party every 3 minutes as you proc your Venthyr ability. All of these can be either good or bad depending on the combination of conduits you also end up with. The healing specific, relying on pure throughput buffs, will be the potency ones. Jade Bond, for instance, makes abilities that trigger your passive also reduce the cooldown of Yulon or Chi-Ji by 0.5 seconds and also increasing their healing effects by 10%. This will increase the uptime on the new cooldown, which is always nice, because it's nice to play with. Nourishing Chi buffs Life Cocoon to increase the healing over time on the target by an additional 15% and also making this effect last for 6 more seconds after Cocoon fades. Cocoon is already a fairly strong cooldown that saves lives pretty often. With this buff you can just put a Cocoon on a target, a Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist, and just focus on something else, maybe refreshing the HOTS in the meantime. Otherwise, there usually isn't a game mechanic that can hit that hard for that amount of damage lasting long enough to get full use out of it, unless those are bleeds or other forms of dots where those extra 6 seconds will actually make a difference. Rising Sun Revival seems to be the Shadowlands version of reducing Revival cooldown, this time by casting Rising Sun Kick. Revival is maybe the strongest cooldown Mistweaver has, and a unique one at that for dispelling debuffs, and with the added hot to it, it will be even more appealing. Lastly, Resplendent Mists will make your Gusts of Mists mastery have a 30% chance to do 25% more healing. This is a bit more vanilla, a bit more reliable, let's say, even if it's a percentage, and the only question that remains is how much throughput is that really? There are still some bugs with the spec that should have been fixed a while ago, and there's actually a forum post that tracks all of them. The spec hasn't changed all that much in terms of playstyle, and if anything the builds might be a bit more defined, which is great to see, more built. A lot of the bugs have been fixed, but some still remain, like Yulon not channeling Soothing Mist properly, and the mastery not applying as it should based on the tooltips. Outside of that, the throughput is pretty good for the spec. All we are missing is some fixes before people decide on the spec, since Bone Dust Brew seems to be pretty strong, especially if it's casted by another monk, which sounds like it shouldn't also affect you, in that you can proc abilities on someone else's Bone Dust Brew. Huh? I recommend you check Abelito's Peak of Serenity post on the state of Mistweaver for a more in-depth look at how the spec is performing and any updates to come as the expansion gets closer to release. Link in the description. And in the description you will also find a link to our Patreon page. Thank you very much for every Patreon that we have. It's very humbling to have you guys here, and we really appreciate every little bit of support that you guys give us, because we do make a living out of this, and your continuous support makes us be able to increase our production quality. You get even more stuff out, like our podcast, which you might or may not have seen yet, and also in the description you might find a link to our merch page, which you can get like customized t-shirts with the hand-drawn design by the Marcelian himself. Thank you very much for watching the video, hope it helped, and we'll see you next time.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.